everybody, my name's Dave. Really excited to be here for a number of different reasons. One, and probably the biggest one of all, is that I'm so glad that I'm going to get to tell this story. It's actually probably the first time I'm telling this story, especially to the crowd that matters most, because the game I'm going to talk about tonight is Distilled. This is the game I designed over the last couple of years, but what's most important about it is that it all began at Protospiel. And not this one, but in Minnesota. And yeah, Minnesota, which will be in January, in case you're interested. But this game started in Minnesota at Protospiel and is still going on, but also went to Kickstarter. So what I just felt, I know Kickstarter, crowdfunding, self-publishing is not for everybody, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And I've tried to sprinkle things in this talk that aren't just about self-publishing. But for those in the room that maybe do have that dream or have that idea of where I want to see my game go, I'm hoping that this talk will maybe just provide a little nugget of something for you as you move forward in your own journey. And that might be starting tomorrow, in all honesty, which is awesome. So a little bit of background on Distilled. So Distilled is the first ever strategy game about crafting spirits in a distillery. So whiskey, gin, rum, all that kind of stuff. It's a medium weight game on BGG, so it's 3.0. Resource management, a little bit of push your luck, but always can be mitigated, as well as some tableau building. So I took this to Kickstarter in July of 2021, so about a year and a half-ish ago. Successfully funded, and we are now kind of moving forward in that near fulfillment stage. So things are moving along very nicely there. So tonight, what I want to do is I want to kind of show you and take you on that journey somewhat. We don't have time to do everything, but to take you on that journey and leave you with 4 classy tips, 4 good tips, things to think that you can kind of keep in mind with takeaways, but also four, and that's only just 4 of many lessons I've learned as well, that I hopefully will not make that same mistake or that same decision again. So it all started, as we can see, we're going to start in fall of 2019, which is when I came up with the idea, and we are going to be fulfilling to backers in Q1, probably January of this coming year. So a little background on me, though. I'm from Menominee, Wisconsin. That's the home of UW-Stout, University of Wisconsin-Stout, so just about 45 minutes outside of the cities over the border. I am the director for the School of Art and Design, largest art and design program in the entire upper Midwest. So we have about 1,300 students studying art and design alone at Stout. Many of those are game designers. I started the game design program at Stout 12 years ago. And it's mainly, obviously, as you can probably imagine with college and game design, it's mainly video games, but we do have a pretty strong tabletop contingent as well, especially all students start out that way when they're first years. So just to give you a little bit of context of who I am and what I do. My background is not in board game design. My background is in video game design and 3D modeling and animation and art and like fine art. I created a game called Tombeau, which is actually about the upper Midwest, mainly the St. Croix River area, and history and environment of that region. It's a video game. You can get it on Steam. It won some awards. I did it myself. I'm not here to talk about that, but what I want to do is tell you, and hopefully that'll kind of make some connections as we get through about kind of my journey into the board game world. But it all started for Distilled is I was lucky enough, and I want to step aside here for a second and say how I want to just recognize how grateful and lucky I have been in many times in my life. Some of it is connected to hard work, but I feel very thankful for many of the things that I've been provided. One of those is a sabbatical. When you're a professor at a university, oftentimes you can apply for and might receive a sabbatical. This allows you to take a semester off, or a year, for me a semester off of teaching, and do something, create some sort of work. I propose to create some VR and AR experience over in Scotland, and I went over there. I was in this house. It looks amazing on the outside. But it's actually through a Wisconsin-Scotland program. Anyone that is familiar with the UW system, there used to be a program that basically students could study in Scotland for a semester or a year, and they would all stay in this house. So it looks gorgeous, like Downton Abbey on the outside, but it looks like a 70s Wisconsin dorm room on the inside. So don't think it was that amazing. Anyway, I was there. I was creating some research with augmented reality and virtual reality for video game stuff. But I'm also happen to be obviously a big tabletop gamer, and I also happen to be a big whiskey fan too. So I was touring distilleries. I was going to equivalent to kind of smaller cons, but gaming cons as well, and really taking it all in while I was doing this research as well. Well, one night, and again, I would be playing, I brought probably almost 2 full checked bags of games with me over there, because I was going to be there for 6 months, and I didn't have any of my games, and so I thought, I'm going to be there with a house full of about 40 students, and I could just, you know, spread the good word to all of them and introduce them to a lot of different types of new games. So one night, and so we would do these game nights. One night I was playing San Juan, and for those that are familiar with San Juan, it's actually a really easily travel game. It should not be in that box. It could easily be in a little bag. It's just a stack of cards for the most part. I was playing that game, some really neat opportunities for playing as different roles, getting different resources, trading those up. So I played that game that night, and I couldn't sleep that night. Literally, it was, my brain was running, maybe from San Juan, maybe from other stuff, who knows. Yes, maybe I had a little bit of whiskey as well. That tended to be something that you would just do, not in excess, but just over there. And it was that night, after I had been doing all those other things, like I said, that I had this idea. It really was a light bulb moment. I thought back to all the whiskey distillery tours I had been taking, and I remembered how they talk about, and this is in real distillation process, that when you distill alcohol, the first part of the run that comes off the still and the last part's toxic. That's when they say, like, moonshine blinded them, it will kill you. It's how they make nail polish remover. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Like, they have to make this cut at the beginning and the end of the run, and the heart, which is the center, is what they want to keep. Wait a minute, that could be a really interesting game mechanic as far as push your luck, where you're shuffling your cards up, you're trying to make something, but you are required to take the top card and the bottom card off of that stack, representing the distillery run. And I thought, what better way to do that than to pair it with maybe a deck building game where I'm putting a deck together. I love that. Putting a deck together and taking that top and bottom card where they're trying to distill an alcohol, but if they take their ingredient that they needed, they're out of luck. So I came up with that idea, and I immediately went to starting to do prototyping. I did a little bit of paper prototyping, just handwritten, but almost immediately, because I had access to a computer and a printer, and my background's in art, I could easily put things together. Obviously not these are not artistic, but I could work in PowerPoint, I could work in Photoshop, and I could put something together. So within a day or so, I had a prototype, a very rough one, where players had a distillery, they were running a distillery, they were trying to make different types of alcohol. And this is where I'm going to start to talk about some of these different tips and processes. We all know, as game designers, that testing is probably one of the most crucial parts of our process. We think we've got a fantastic idea until we set it in front of other people, they tear it apart, or it falls apart, and we have to iterate and return to that group or another group as well. So my first tests, of course, were just myself. I oftentimes call them four-handed, two-handed tests. If you haven't done this with your own designs, I highly recommend you do this first and foremost. This is a #1 rule because it will save you tons of time before you sit down at the table with others. Those others, and there's another example of that, of kind of that prototype of what that player board looked like. And it's funny because if you look at the game today, there still are these types of things, just in a different arrangement. Once you do something yourself, though, which is, again, I want to emphasize, it sounds good and plays well in your head, but until you get it in front of other people, or sorry, yourself, and find some of those kinks that aren't working with player interaction, it has the potential to fall flat. So then the next step, of course, is I brought it in front of who I had as family, if you will, at that place, which was these students living in this house with me. So again, my family was over there too, but also these students studying were there, and I've picked out some of the ones that have particularly enjoyed the game night with me and asked them to play test Distilled. So this is actually the first play test of the game with other people. By then, I'd play tested it myself probably 4 to 6 times. I had been ordering sleeves and other stuff online to kind of soup it up a little bit more. Then I bring it back to back to the States, and I invite my friends over. Right? And so this is the second part. I had my family playing with me. I had my friends playing with me. The game is continuing to evolve every time. And then I finally debut it to strangers at Protospiel, Minnesota, And so here's a picture of a couple of those people sitting around the table playing, all designers themselves. In fact, the guy in the bottom left is co-designing my next game with me. I met him at Protospiel. But again, regardless, the whole idea here is that I'm taking this and putting this in front of strangers, and most importantly, putting it in front of designers, okay? And then finally, there you are, buddy. So finally, I also took it to Con of the North, and I had it in front of strangers that were not designers, and that's almost all, not designers. They were players, they were fans, they were people that maybe didn't know, but they were looking for this type of game. So I'm bringing it through in front of lots of different groups of people. And this leads me to my first tip is really thinking about what I like to call the testing trifecta. Now this is, of course, trying to achieve that testing trifecta is assuming you have already four-handed, two-handed played this game yourself around the table so that you're working out those other kinks. I recommend you do start with family and friends first. They're going to give you positive feedback. They're going to sugarcoat things. They're actually going to build your ego up a little bit before it gets crushed by the designers and the other strangers, okay? And that's good. But you also, and this is important, because we've all been there, you're working down, at least I'm describing myself here, so you're working in the basement, long hours every night, and your family starts to wonder, like, man, really? You're just working on a game? You're cutting pieces of paper out and putting in sleeves? This demonstrates the work to them. And if you've ever had your family kind of compliment you or play your game, you know that what they say is they kind of are in awe of kind of this system that you might have created. It's important to communicate that to them as well so that they can be along on that journey with you. The next one, of course, is those designers and publishers. So that's what we're here for with Protospiel. They're going to give you tips on production. So the publishers especially will say, that's going to be way too expensive to produce. You need to figure out a way to cut those cards numbers in half, or whatever it might be. Oftentimes designers, and I'm guilty of this for sure, is they're going to tell you how they would design it. They're not giving you feedback necessarily on, which is fine, right? As long as you understand that's what's happening. They're not giving you feedback necessarily on maybe always what you're seeking, but how they feel they could make it better. And I actually think that's a really important thing. As long as you know that perspective going into it, that's a good thing. But then probably more important than anything, just like with demonstrating your work to your family and friends, is you're playing their games. We all know that at a Protospiel, or if this is your first time, I'll tell you, you don't set your game up on a table and just kind of sit and wait for people to come by and play your game, right? So you might do that at a con, which is fine. But at Protospiel, it's all about trading and giving back, paying it forward. So I might play 3 or 4 other people's games and then say, hey, do you want to play my game now, right? So it's that idea of always making sure that you're giving back more than you're receiving. But in that process, of course, what's happening is you are learning and you are observing how their game and prototypes are made, the questions they're asking, which is crucial, and other approaches too. So again, super important. And finally, and this is different, is gamers and fans. I have found, in fact, in the early stages of Distilled, getting lots of feedback from designers and publishers that they're not telling me to stop at all, but were causing me to think like, okay, maybe this has got some legs. We'll see. I'm going to keep moving forward. But then taking it to cons and letting fans play this, and that's who's going to buy your game at the end of the day. So you need to make sure that you're getting in front of them too. You might find that they're the ones that are going wild for it while you were critiqued a little bit more from some of those other groups. So make sure you're doing that. You're testing the market of those people. That's when you're also gathering emails. And in addition to here, of course, but you're gathering emails. I'll talk about that a little bit too. And it also starts to get you in that rhythm of understanding how to work cons, how to set up booths or set up tables in the case of starting out. All very, very important stuff. Reaching out to people as they walk by saying, hey, are you interested in playing this game? That's going to warm you up to eventually, potentially, at some day, be working at your own booth or being a part of a publisher's booth as the designer. Of course, then, as we all know, the pandemic hit, changed the world forever, changed our game design space forever as well, and I would argue in a very good way. I went complete from paper prototyping, playing maybe once a week, maybe every couple weeks, to playing constantly online. I took my entire thing onto Tabletop Simulator immediately. I did that with the help. I feel like it's like a constant in every one of these talks, but it's true. It wouldn't have to be part of GameCrafter, but Component Studio really did helped me transform that. Because I could take those cards, take those designs and immediately churn it out and instantly import it into Tabletop Simulator. So I could test a game, have 2 hours in between the next play test, change, iterate, and update, and we're here and we're ready to go. So I highly recommend that. Of course, I did all that on Discord as well. So I'm going to probably sing praises of online playtesting over and over again tonight. It's such a huge, huge component. And I would argue a crucial component moving forward for all designers if they do want to make sure they're reaching the largest possible audience. So you can see now I didn't have to worry about printing in black and white because I couldn't afford to print in color before. Now it's all, of course, it's all color. I can start playing with that. This is, again, an early iteration of that in Tabletop Simulator. Again, getting a chance to play test that in that space. I, of course, created an account on Steam. Eventually, this is probably about March or April. Yeah, probably about April. I made it live in public, which means anyone in the entire world could play. I didn't have to say, will you play my game? It was just there. And if people stumble across it and play, I have a way that they can fill out a link for a survey as well. And I tell them that they're going to be credited as a play tester if they do, which is true, if they do play and fill out the survey. But this allows me to gain access to many, many more people. I can't, thousands of people, even before the Kickstarter, access this because I was able to continue to kind of make this presence online. It's free once you get Tabletop Simulator, so people would be interested in playing. So because of that, here's more of a final version of what it looks like today. It has scripting I worked with, which I'll talk about in a second. It has been tested by me or my team over 200 times in Tabletop Simulator. For almost a year, I didn't touch a physical prototype at all. I just play tested in Tabletop Simulator, okay? And that leads me to my first lesson learned. Don't forget the meat space. That was a major mistake, okay? Why was it a major mistake? Dave, you play tested it 200 times, over 200 times in the digital space. Yeah, and by the time I got it to the physical space again, it wouldn't fit on a table because I had lost touch with what would be important or would take too long to set up, for instance. So I can't emphasize enough how it's important to do both of those parallel. Think about that digital space and how crucial that is, but also think about how that physical space and that physical interaction is why we're making games in the first place. Most likely is our final version is going to be that. So really think about that. And obviously, if there's any questions throughout this, please raise your hand and interrupt me. I'm happy to dive into it deeper. So here's a couple of playtesting processes that I use. I'm the owner of Paverson Games, the one and only person at Paverson Games. So publishing studio that I created as a result of all this. I really try to play only when a seat is needed at the table. So that might be obvious, but I want to make sure that I'm watching this from an outside view and making sure also that my testing or my playing is not affecting other players and how they're doing it. Obviously, when there is a seat needed, then I can test specific kind of outline strategies or weird things that I've been wanting to test. Like I said, test both online and simultaneously. I really try and play test the game I'm working on, and I'll just tell you now, I'm kind of like a one-focused person. I do not have 5 or 6 different games I'm working on. I know many of you do that, which is awesome. I just can't. I'm very much a one-track person as far as the game I'm working on. So for me, testing my game at least once weekly, or at least testing others' games online or in person at least once weekly, really helps me to kind of stay my nose on the grindstone moving forward. I try to always provide all players at the table with a notepad and pencil. Obviously with a phone, sure, but if it's right there, then they might be able to write some things down. We've all been there when we've play tested a game and we've thought of something maybe mid-game, and then we're like, yeah, I'll remember to bring that up at the end. Then you like have trouble bringing that up. So it's just a great way for people to be able to consult their notes or hand them into you as well. Obviously, phone's fine too if people are comfortable with that as well. Obviously, and of course, again, for those that are not used to, I know some of you might be, this is your first time at a protospiel or first time testing with groups, you'll want to try and save feedback for the end. Sometimes people will try and kind of stop mid-game and start giving you feedback. And try and remind them, it'd be great if we could just wait till the end for feedback. Now, sometimes a game might not be working at all, and it's time for the table to decide, maybe it's time for us to stop and maybe talk about it from here. But just for the most part, try and be ready with some questions at the end. Be open, obviously, for further feedback as well. I always collect emails, and I have a post-test survey. So if you play test my game this weekend, you'll be getting a survey from me. I actually have a QR code at the table that people will snap. That not only allows them to put their email in as well as their name, but also give some feedback. Why I ask for their name is that I guarantee, or I say, anyone that play tests my game will be in the credits for the final game as a play tester. I think it's really important to value the time people give to these types of things, and it allows those people then to understand and kind of become invested in that game as well. That's especially true. Sure, it's great for something like protospiel, staying in touch, but it's especially true for a con, because again, it allows those fans or future fans to become invested in your game. So, you know, this should and usually is a whole talk in itself by many other awesome game designers, but please don't be afraid to change your game. Oftentimes they'll talk about killing your darlings. If you haven't heard that phrase before with game design, be sure to do a search. You'll find a bunch of awesome videos and presentations by people talking about that, or podcasts as well. I had one example of this actually about halfway through the pandemic, halfway through testing. I'd been play testing with a group of designers online. There's lots of great groups on Discord that play test games. And we got to feedback, and this one person basically ripped into me. And he didn't do it very nicely, but that's okay. He wasn't very constructive. But he essentially said, this game had this wrong with it. I, at one point, just got up and went to do the dishes because I had to wait so long between my turn, and I came back and it wasn't my turn yet. He was kind of basically just a little bit rude to me about it. But what was interesting about that point, and I'm not going to kind of give him too much credit for this, but that really instilled in me that night, again, up late that night, thinking about his feedback and others. I need to change this. There's way too long of time between a player turn. And it made me completely throw out the deck build. There's no deck building in my game anymore, and go to something completely different. It's got a root of deck building in the game still, but what that did was it allowed me to realize this is my game, and I should give this a try. I should toss this stuff out and try something new, see if it works. And if it doesn't, fine. I'll go back to it because I still had positive reactions from the other one as well. So don't be afraid to kill some of that stuff if it feels like you should maybe just give it a try. What that means, though, is make one change at a time. Oh my gosh. This is probably a big mistake that many people will make, beginning designers especially, but if you make 5 different changes at once, and you're really excited about all of them and you're confident about all of them, like I always am too, you're not going to be able to figure out what worked and what didn't. So just be patient. If you've got 5 ideas, awesome. Just do one at a time. Test it. If it's working, good. Then test it against the next one. I'm sure there's some scientific name for that besides the scientific method. I don't know. But regardless of what it is, really be sure you're doing one baby step at a time for that. And then we heard a little bit about blind play tests before from Nicole. Blind play tests are awesome because basically you sit back and let them do it without teaching or guiding them. That's usually something you do much later in the process though, right? So you don't want to necessarily do that until you feel pretty solid about the rules too, because they're likely critiquing and play testing your rules as well. So just another thing to keep in mind there. So some of these I think are very obvious to people that have been designing games for a bit, but for some that are newer, I thought that would be helpful. Okay, so there we go. We did lots of different stuff, basically in the first and kind of into the second half of 2020. Lots of testing, lots of online. It was on Tabletopia as well, all throughout the pandemic. I was, of course, still a professor. I was also still a husband and father, and then I was also now a game designer, right? So we know we all are probably doing this kind of in our spare time, and that gets to be really hard. So that's another thing, although it's not in the slide, I want you to keep that in mind, that as you're thinking about your future as a potential game designer, think about how that works into the pie that is your life, right? That making sure that you have time for balance still. I know that, once I started designing games, I stopped playing as many games, sadly, because I'm focusing so much time on my own designs. So that leads me to my next spot, is a question of that many of you might be in this room be thinking, if I've got a pretty good design I'm excited about, do I publish it? Do I self-publish it? Or do I pitch it? So really publish is, in my case, what I'm talking about is self-publish. So self-publish means, of course, you're likely kickstarting the project, or if you have a large amount of funds to support you and back you in another way, that could be it as well. But somehow you're going to need to raise funds to be able to make this happen. You're going to be responsible for everything. I'm so glad Nicole went before me, because everything that she talked about is the types of things that you're going to have to do. You're going to have to hire freelancers for those things you must do that you're not able to, or that maybe you might not be able to do. There's a lot of stuff with that. You're the business side of that. You're going to have to start a business most likely if you do this, because you don't want all of this stuff caught up in your own personal finances. You're going to have to form an LLC most likely, so that if something does go wrong or you do go bankrupt, it doesn't affect your personal finances. You're taking a gamble though. You're going to spend probably 10 times the amount of work on this as a publisher, but you might see 10 times the amount of profit as compared to a designer, which we'll talk about in a second. And again, like I said, doing it all yourself, or you're assembling a team, but you have full control over your game's direction. That could be good or bad, but in this case, you have full control of the direction of your game. Now pitching, kind of to look at those right opposite, you're not going to need to kickstart a project, but you need to develop that strong pitch, that sell sheet. So if you're a designer out there that are hoping to pitch to publishers, you're going to need some sort of one sheet perhaps, so people can read over it, your rules as well. But then you're also going to need to be ready to kind of sit down and talk with these publishers, or send it to them, knowing it might be weeks, months before you hear back from some of them. You, of course, will not need to worry about art and graphic design really at all beyond the playability, usability of the game, because they will do everything as far as the publisher goes, most likely. This is probably a big positive for some of you. This means you get to design more games. I can tell you that I only started very recently designing another game. So it took me almost over 2 years before I got to design anything again, because I was so caught up in publishing for myself. You potentially will see money in the future if you get signed, and if they sell well, or if they decide to publish it at all, then you might see a little bit of money, and that'll probably be around 5% of their profit, okay? Maybe 5 to 6% of their profit. If you negotiate well. So it's not going to be a ton of money, but at the same time, you're not beyond your idea and what you've developed so far. It's kind of like you've grown this little plant up and you've planted it, and then you'll be able to reap some of those apples later on. Of course, then you also can rely on a diverse team of experts and backgrounds. They'll likely, depending on the company, will be hiring lots of people that are specialists in lots of areas, and you'll see your game come to life with all these different experts contributed to it. But you may not have control over the game, right? So even the theme that you might have come up with might be changed by the publisher. So you just need to be open to that as well. Lots of this will be in that contract. This is not going to be a talk about all of that, but lots of that will be laid out in a contract, much like Nicole talked about a freelance contract with artists. As a designer, you would be getting a contract as well from the publishing company. And I would recommend, just like, I'm just going to keep saying just like Nicole said. Everything Nicole said is right and true. Yeah, but same thing, like she said earlier about seeing the lawyer, you're probably going to want to run that by a lawyer as well before you sign anything. Now, in the end, I chose to self-publish. Why? Well, a couple reasons. One, my colleague, a friend of mine, a colleague, would do all the art and graphic design. He had some former experience working on a game actually with his wife, and he actually lives in town with me. He teaches illustration at Stout. So it worked actually out very well that way. I was also going into business with my friends, so that's a caveat I'd strongly warn you against. It worked out, luckily, but I wanted full control over the vision. I remember people telling me, this is not going to sell. No one's going to be interested in a game about whiskey. There's beer and wine games. No one will be interested in that. And I had in the back of my mind, I really thought differently, and I thought, okay, well, I'm going to need to make this happen the way I want this to happen. And then finally, probably most importantly, I was completely naive and ignorant and had absolutely no idea what I was getting into. Okay? So I want to be very clear about that. And that was probably the number one thing why I went into being self-publishing. So what I'm going to throw up here now is a bunch of different visual resources that you're welcome to take pictures of. You're welcome. I think you can probably see this streaming on later as well. Things that really help me, both as a publisher, but also as a designer. So we've referenced it a couple times already, but probably one of the most crucial ones is the Board Game Design Lab. So the Board Game Design Lab is an online Facebook group of designers that is awesome. But probably even more importantly than that, and this is all created by a person named Gabe Barrett, even more important than that is the podcast that he ran for years. It's over now, unfortunately, I think after about 200 episodes or something. But it's a phenomenal podcast. I recommend listening to every single one of them if you're a designer, because they're interviewing different designers. Some big designers, small designers, everything in between. Phenomenal. And then he also wrote 2 books, Board Game Design Advice, or I should say edited 2 books. Board Game Design Advice from the Best in the World and Board Game Kickstarter Advice. Also great reads, also great ways he's basically taking a lot from his podcast and distilling it into essentially written text form, interviews with different designers. 2 other podcasts really quick. Ludology is an awesome one as well. And then if you're interested in the publishing space, especially for crowdfunding nerds, even though the name is cheesy, is a pretty good one from the business side. You can get a trove of information on Cardboard Edison. Cardboard Edison's website has tons of stuff from contests to rate sheets and things like how much a designer is paid usually as far as the royalties a designer might get. Those types of things as well based on industry surveys. And then finally, Jamie Stegmeier's Crowdfunder Strategy Guide, even though it's a little bit old, still very good, very much pulled from all of his former blog posts. So lots of good research stuff, but whether it's design, publishing, or both, these are some of the resources I'd highly recommend. Any other resources I don't have up here that anyone would recommend?
I would say Jamie Stegmaier does send out like monthly-ish emails for crowdfunding that's more recent than the book.
Yeah, you're right. So it's kind of like it's still blog posts or news articles, emails, and you can find them online. You're totally right. That's a good one. Yep. Any others?
Jeff Engelstein's got a really good book that includes a lot of the Game Crafter and component studio tie-ins.
Oh, really?
So yeah, and it came out last year, and it's awesome.
Is
that again?
Is that the mechanics book? That has like a steampunk chess set on the front? That Facebook keeps telling me to buy that book, and I probably should.
Yeah, we actually might sell it in our shop, but we'll see. But Building Blocks of Tabletop Game Design, I think is the
Building Blocks of Tabletop Game Design by Jeff Engelstein.
I think that's the new one.
And then I think I saw 1 or 2 others.
I'm probably a reader with this one, but I'm only here because I bought the white box.
Yeah, the white box, yeah.
And that book especially, like he just carried around with me, and that kind of helped me realize not to do the art first and things like that.
Yeah, the white box is essentially, it's like you're buying a board game. It's a white box, but inside it's essentially a game designer's toolkit. It's pretty awesome. So I think it's just called the white box, right? Yeah.
I mean, the book is even better than, pieces of
Yeah.
The book itself was invaluable for
Nice. So the book inside too. Yeah. Cool. All right. So again, lots of research out there for sure. Also, start thinking about design competitions. When you feel like your game is ready for that next step, this is a great way, obviously, to be able to kind of get a stamp of approval that, okay, I think I'm heading in the right direction. But also, I'll tell you, little spoiler alert, these design competitions entirely exist for publishers to snap up those designs, okay? So if you enter your design, even if it's not one, there's a very good chance if it's a successful one that people might reach out to you afterwards. The judges and jurors are all publishers and designers, and sometimes they're even sponsored by publishers and designers. So it's a really great way to connect with it. So for instance, I was lucky enough to be a finalist for both of those. On the left, Cardboard Edison and Ion Award, and you basically have kind of live pitches with a group of publishers as well. They knew by that point I'd already decided I was crowdfunding, but at the same time, that's an opportunity to be able to be approached by some of those as well. And then on the smaller side too, so we've got these big ones, these are kind of big national ones, but then the Game Crafter and Board Game Geek run lots of different contests. And oftentimes these are, I think, is the latest one, the Game Crafter, is that the single card? One card! So rules, game, everything on one card, right? So you might think like, oh yeah, but that's not the game I'm doing. But that's okay. Participating in those exercises not only connects you with others, gets your name out there. If you end up kind of rising up to the top of that, people will start to notice that. And again, same thing on Board Game Geek. So those two I have on the right that are, I say smaller, and they probably actually have more participants, to be perfectly honest, but they're smaller in the sense of they have lots of them throughout the year, while these are two big ones that only two of many big ones that people strive for. Okay, so like I said, attending cons. So we talked about this a little bit before too. Again, Nicole, I'm just going to keep referencing you. So Nicole had mentioned First Exposure Playtest Hall. Awesome opportunity to be able to get your game out there in front of con goers. This photo's from a couple years ago. And is, yeah, another great, fantastic opportunity. Unpub, somewhat similar. That happens at Origins. Unpub also, I believe, has their own con, kind of like a protospiel as well.
BGG Con as well.
BGG Con too? Okay, cool.
And PAX Unplugged.
Yeah, PAX, there, I mean, you can pretty much be guaranteed that any bigger con probably has a subset that is playtesting. And if it doesn't, that's okay too. You can still sign up your game as events. So like, I'm going to a small con of the North, actually, what I talked about before. I'm just setting up for playtest, and people sign up for events to playtest the game. So that's a really helpful way to do it too. And of course, Protospiel is my favorite of all, because that's what it's all about, is playtesting with other designers. Heather was here earlier. Protospiel Online is huge. That happens, I think, 3 times a year. That happens entirely through Discord, as well as, I don't think they're using Tabletop Simulator anymore. I think they're maybe using Tabletop Playground, maybe. Don't quote me on that, but you'll find the information. Go to Protospiel Online, another awesome, awesome resource, pairing you up with different designers. So, classy tip number 2. There's really no wrong answer to publish or pitch, okay? You need to make that decision. I went this way, you might go that way. And you really need to kind of think hard about what it is, what's important to you about this process. If it is just purely designing games and nothing else, then I think it's pretty obvious you probably want to go the pitch route. But if you like the idea of forming a business and seeing your vision through to the end and kind of having this be a major part of your life, then you might want to think about the publish route. But 2 lesson learned. Yes, Steve? Are you going to self-publish your second game? Yes. Yep, good question. I'll get to that a little bit in a second. Lesson learned number 2, if you do self-publish, say goodbye to family and free time. Now, I don't mean that like my family's left me, luckily not yet at least, but I don't see I'm being serious here. I don't see my family as much anymore. At night, I'm oftentimes working, or right now, I wanted my family to come. They couldn't come along because my daughter had a commitment, Science Olympiad commitment back in Menominee, so they couldn't come along. And this is the type of thing that just how the nature of this field works, especially if you're in the publishing side, because you're essentially trying to do your own job like I am, but then also trying to run a business as well. And the only time to do that is night and weekends, right? So really think hard about if this is something that you want to do, what you're going to be maybe giving up in hopes of, in the long term, maybe the dream is that I'm doing something like publishing full time. We'll see, but right now, I can't necessarily afford to do that. Classy tip number 3, pretty obvious one probably, but use your network or create one. So again, this is probably a little bit more on the publishing side. So again, for those that are interested in this, pay close attention. For others though, maybe this helps you see what a publishing team looks like. Like I said, I decided to kickstart Distilled, and I knew then that I had to assemble a team. I was forming a company. I was bringing a group of people together because I could not do it all myself. So first, I leaned on who I had near me. In the middle is Eric Evanson. He's the illustrator. He's the artist and graphic designer for the game. He also was the artist and graphic designer for Marrying Mr. Darcy, his wife's game. So if anyone's ever played that card game, really fun little card game. Seth Barrier's on the left. He's done all the scripting in Tabletop Simulator for me. He's a computer science programmer at Stout. And on the right is Cody Reimer. He is my rules editor. He's a technical writer, professor of technical writing at Stout. And so I've brought those people together to help me form this team. I'm paying all of these people what I believe are professional wages. I'm not saying, can you do this for me for free because you're my friend? No, this is all part of it. In fact, because I didn't know how well Distilled might or might not do, I didn't pay them as much as I would have liked, but I said they're all going to get a percentage of the Kickstarter. And boy, did that come back to haunt me when I raised over $500,000 on Kickstarter, and they did pretty well. I then was doing a virtually expo with Games Expo UK, and I met this guy named Richard Woods. He fell in love with the game, started talking to me. We started a conversation on Discord. He is now my full-time game developer. So he does nothing but develop my games. What that means is I see cards and images and player experience. He sees spreadsheets, and he sees numbers and how to change values to balance it perfectly throughout and allow different paths to winning and victory and strategy. Remember, I'm kind of working in the medium to medium heavy space, which a lot of that then still kind of gets in the way. I'm an artist by heart, so I like to throw things at a wall and see what sticks. While Richard then steps back and says, like, Dave, you have no idea what you're doing. Let me fix that a little bit. So Richard and I talk daily now. He's part of the team. During Gen Con Online, I met this guy named Blake. He ended up he's a bartender, but also a certified mixologist out in San Francisco. So he's been my spirits consultant for the game, wrote all the flavor text for the entire game. Neo Tang Wei, I met at Origins Online. He also was playing online. So all these are me meeting people at cons or online. He's in Singapore. He became such a fan of the game and wanted to help out. I made him my community manager. So he now answers questions on BGG when they pop up, on our Facebook profile, anywhere he jumps onto it and helps people out as well. David Digby I met in Virtual Playtesters, which is one of the online game designer spaces in Discord. He designed my solo game for me. And then George Georgiadis of Oniro, he ended up doing the trailer. I met him as well on one of the online cons. And then Martin Gonzalez of Martin's Print and Play Hideaway on Facebook, he helped craft my print and play. And then finally, last but not least, we realized our game spans the entire world, represents 18 different countries, cultures, people, and spirits. And we wanted to make sure that we were representing all these different cultures properly and authentically and respectfully. And so I had, around this time, maybe a year and a half ago, I started reading about Frosthaven running into some issues with some of the writing in that game, being a little bit too stereotypical. And they were quoting how they worked with this gentleman named James Mendez-Hose, a cultural consultant. So I decided to hire James as a cultural consultant for the game as well. So again, it's assembling a team of people that things you can't do, like Nicole said, and finding the best people in the job that could do it. But you also want to create your community. So again, for publishers especially, for those self-publishers, but also for others, you want to immediately, if you haven't yet, start creating social media platforms. That might be things like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, but also on Board Game Geek as well. The second that you know that you are going to be taking your game to Kickstarter, you should have your game up there. Plant that flag, right? It doesn't cost anything. It gets through, and then you can start to refer to it as well. I started doing lots of, because I was trying to generate a following, I started doing probably about once a month, every 2 weeks maybe. I do this thing called Whiskey Wednesday. It was a live on Facebook. You can see the bottom left there, me just talking to fans. I also found themes around my day or around my game and celebrated days online just to garner attention. So, you know, Martini Day, June 19th, 2021. I found any cocktail day and I made that part of my social media posting so I could always be fresh and gathering more people. And of course, playtesters. You need to continue to bring other people into the fold. So I'd be always looking for volunteers within my own community, but then joining others. So the three on the right are probably the three most is most active in on Discord. So the top one, Heavyweight Championship Playtesters, is for heavy, medium to heavy games. You just playtest each other's heavy games. So often, even this weekend, my game now, the one I'm working on right now, will take 3 hours, probably 2.5 with feedback, maybe a little bit, and teach a little bit more to play. Oftentimes with playtesting, we only have time to playtest an hour or two, right, of our games. So that's a great way to do that. Virtual playtesting is over based in the UK, and then remote playtesting as well, all on Discord. So lots of different ways you can start to get involved in the community as well. So lesson learned number 3 is a little bit different out of left field. But you need to think about diversifying your team like you did with your game. So I'm not sure how much you noticed there, but I had a bunch of guys on that list. My team was a bunch of guys. That's not what I sought out to do. That's really what ended up happening naturally over time. And I'm trying to make sure not to make that mistake again, or I shouldn't say mistake, but not go in that direction again for my second game. Thinking about how we can have different people from around the world, different genders, different viewpoints, working on this team together, and especially if it's representing a game that is supposed to represent that as well. So I really want I want to challenge all of you as designers and publishers to think about how you can make a difference as well by allowing other people to kind of join your circle, join your team as you're putting something out. Yeah?
You're talking a lot about your second game. Can you give a brief summary on that?
Sure. My second game is called Luthier. It's about crafting musical instruments. And I'm actually co-designing it with Abe Burson, who was in that slide earlier. He's been working on it for over 10 years, and I saw it at his at Protospiel 2020 in Minneapolis, and I reached out to him about 6 months ago and offered him to have Paverson Games publish it, and I co-design it. So essentially, it's a hidden bidding worker placement game. So your workers are discs with strength, and when I place a disc out on the table, you don't know what strength, 1 through 5 it is. And you could go to that same place and put another strength to jump ahead of me there. And so it's got some resource management as well, and a bunch of other stuff too, but kind of a medium heavy game. Okay, so now moving on a little bit to Kickstarter and business tips. So my fourth classy tip is plan your Kickstarter like a wedding.
Oh no, Bridezilla?
Yes, they could, I should have included that. They could be, yes. That was me on Kickstarter launch night, Eve. So what I mean by that is you basically need to start about a year out, okay? So if you want to have a successful Kickstarter, so again, I fully understand I'm speaking mostly to people that are thinking about self-publishing now, so we've kind of shifted into that realm. But you really need to think about that Kickstarter far out because you're going to have a lot of work to do up until then, and I can't recommend highly enough starting kind of at that and working yourself back as far as your dates. So a year away, determine your date about 10 months from that point. And about 11 months away, start saving to spend. I spent well over half. My goal was $18,000. I probably spent $10,000 to $15,000 total leading up to my Kickstarter on stuff. Reviewers, prototypes from the Game Crafter that were very expensive, which I'll tell you about in a second. Yeah, they were super custom. Well, and that's why. You'll hear me, you'll see it, kind of. As well as advertising, promotion. So I'll show you some of that in a second. 10 months, start establishing that business. If you haven't formed that LLC yet, be sure you form that LLC. Start building an email list. Have a goal of having 1,000 people on that email list, which seems like a lot, which it is. But if you go to enough cons, you do enough stuff online, you do enough advertising, engage with enough people online, it can happen. I kicked off my Kickstarter with about 2,000 people on my mailing list. Start booking trailers, graphic design, and ad agencies that are going to surround your Kickstarter. So some people say a video trailer, that video at the top of your Kickstarter, isn't that important. I disagree. I do think it speaks to a certain type of audience. It obviously depends on the game that you're putting out. For me, though, I felt it was important to do. So I had to book that about 8 months out, probably a little bit more than that. The graphic design, who's going to design that page for you so it really feels polished. And obviously with Kickstarter, you can still see all this, so you can go to the Distilled campaign later if you want to see what I mean. And then ad agencies, booking an ad agency so that you can advertise your Kickstarter a couple months out. At about 7 months, I contacted 20, actually that probably should be more like 30 content creators to get on their schedule, to say, hey, I'm going to be sending you a game that I'm hoping, if you're interested, it's that idea of reaching out and negotiating with them, hoping if you're interested to have you cover Distilled. Then at 6 months, push the date 2 months back because you realize you're not ready yet, okay? Because that's what I did. So in around month 5, I ordered 10 prototypes. Those prototypes cost me $150 a piece to make. They might be like, what? Well, I've got almost 400 cards. I worked with the laboratory, I'll talk about that in a second, to custom create things. I wanted to create a game that when the content creators looked at it, they didn't realize it was a prototype, and it worked. So that's why I paid so much, but it paid back dividends for that.
I think it was 160.
Okay, it was 160. It probably was. Also, contact podcasts and start working on that trailer with that person, as well as the Kickstarter page design, 4 months. So this is important. In 3 months out, send those 10 final prototypes to 10 creators, 10 of the biggest content, most likely biggest content creators you're going with. Mine was on Dice Tower, mine was on Man vs. Meeple, and that's not cheap. I had to pay a lot of money to get on those, right? So you need to also you needed to gauge what you want. I knew at this point, based on the following I had, that I could afford to invest in that, and I thought I would get some back on that. If you're looking to raise, if you only have maybe a couple hundred people on your email list, and it's a smaller game that's not going to be too expensive, you probably don't need to send it to those people and pay lots of money at all. There's other options. So just think about what tier is best for you. But send those 10 to 10 creators. Remember, I said 20, but I'll tell you why. 2 months out, start advertising on Facebook. That's when you start advertising on Facebook. And advertising means they click a link and they go to sign up for an email. That's it. All they're doing is going to sign up for your newsletter, because then on Kickstarter launch day, I hit send to those 2,000 people and say, go pledge my campaign. And then finally, 1 month out, have those first 10 creators send it to 10 more. So they've sat on it for a month, and it's very common, and they're used to this, to after they've filmed their piece and created their contact, they're going to send that on to the next. You're going to pay them to send it, but they're going to send that on to the next group. I actually had them send on 10 more after that. So I had 30 different people covering my game. Everything from writing an article to a podcast to a video to an Instagram post. Most of those I did not need to pay. I promised them a final product of the game, and that was fine, because their following or their size is small enough that they're not a business that's charging like Man vs. Meeple or Dice Tower or Rahdo. And then obviously, month 0 launch. So lots of different steps. This is me this is kind of off the top of my head what I would say. When you read those books, you're going to get all this stuff and more as well. Yeah.
A relatively new feature, at least as far as I'm aware, on Kickstarter is that people can follow pre-launch, right? And I'm just wondering, I haven't researched it, so I'm wondering pre-launch versus mailing list, or should you get mailing list and then tell them to do pre-launch? How do those two?
Good question. Yeah, I had a couple thousand on pre-launch too following, and they, of course, they'll get that email from Kickstarter, which is, you bring up a good point, Nicole, because I mean, there's a good chance that email is going to show up in their inbox for sure, while mine might be in spam. My newsletter might be in spam. I still probably will push the newsletter sign up, because then I have that kind of point of contact with them throughout time. Now, the good news, though, is there's no reason you shouldn't be trying to do both. So that's a good point, because when I launch my next campaign, all the people that backed my game and followed it also will get an email from Kickstarter, from the previous one as well. So it's a good way to mount that up. But if I jumped over to GameFound for my next project, which many people are doing those types of things, I don't have that email list anymore, but I do in my newsletter. Oh, yeah.
What would you guess your second, what percentage of the work is going to carry over to your second game?
Percentage of the work,
It's
like,
going to take you as much work on your second game as it took you.
no, not at all. And percentage-wise, I mean, things like, things like setting up a bank account, setting up a trade. I decided to trademark Distilled. I didn't need to, but I did. A PO box. So the business side, no, it's all kind of set in place. I now have a manufacturer. That was a large part of my process too. I'm not even going to talk about today. I was talking and interviewing at one point 10 different manufacturers in China to figure out which one I was going to go with. Well, I know as long as I do a good job with Distilled, I'm going to probably stick with the company. So those types of things. I'll probably go back to many of these people, the content creators, and say, hey, you up for this again? And I hope, based on their experience, that they'll do it as well. So that's a really good point. I had a spreadsheet of probably, 75 to 100 different content creators with how many followers they had, how much they charged. So this big list of me trying to aggregate information, I don't really need that as much now, because I'll probably go back to that same list. Great question. So yeah, forming a business. So putting together business cards, opening a business bank account is huge. Once you form that LLC, You can do that through LegalZoom. So you can do it other ways too, of course. But I use LegalZoom to form the LLC. You can do it by paperwork and free, I think, or somewhat free as well. I decided to do a PO box so that everything went there. I did trademark Distilled. That was a long process, and it's a little costly. Is it required? No, not at all. But it also allowed me, what I did do and why I decided to do it is I looked up, I basically tried to follow Jamie Stegmaier. Whenever he did anything, I did it. And Stonemaier trademarks all their games. And I thought, well, if Stonemeier's doing it, why not? I'm going to do this because I feel like just in case, it plants a flag and says nobody else can actually come out with a game called Distilled. Like that's the nature of it. So lots of different business aspects, things to think about. Forming that LLC is most important. And again, those books I showed you earlier, as well as listening to those podcasts, are going to tell you all this in great detail. Yeah, craft the factory prototype. So there's 7 of them. I already sent a couple out. So these were full-on factory prototypes. I worked with Razzo at the Game Crafter Laboratory. Essentially, in Component Studio, I had been putting my cards cards into Tabletop Simulator. And then, as people have mentioned already, you can also have Component Studio export to Game Crafter. I was doing that. You can also, no one mentioned this yet, and this is my favorite part about it, you can also have Component Studio export to print and play. So you can print and play your prototypes as well that way. So it's awesome. So it allows you to do that. But as we know, Game Crafter can only do so many things that are like off the shelf. Like, oh, anything you can do in this, as an example, this size of a board, a foot by foot board or whatever, we can help you with. Choose from one of these selections. But if you go with the laboratory, which does cost a little bit more, you're essentially connecting one-on-one with someone working at the Game Crafter that will help you design your game components. So I had custom dual layered boards manufactured through them. I had curved boards as well, extra large boards that normally wouldn't as well. So things like that. So think about that as you get closer. It costs a lot more money, but it's worth it at the end because all of the content creators thought this was the final version, even though the art wasn't at all either, but they did, and that's what's important about it. Now, again, as anyone knows that's gotten stuff from the Game Crafter, anything laser cut, do not send this in shrink to the content creator because it will be filled, unless the laboratory's done all the work for you, because they will clean it, which is pretty awesome. All of it's going to arrive covered in soot because the laser cutter has cut out everything out of the cardboard. So it's just going to be you a night with some podcasts on, just cleaning those up, bagging them up. I put a note and I separate everything into bags with labels for the content creator. So when they get it, everything is there and set for them as well. So make sure you're setting up this as a custom experience for them too. I also sent shot glasses because I had distilled shot glasses to each of them as a gift too. So then leverage that media. So I had a couple how to play videos. Ryan's my favorite from Nights Around the Table. He does stop motion how to play videos, so I commissioned him to do my official how to play video. Dice Tower played it through the summer as well. Those are examples of costing a decent amount of money, but you're getting what you pay for, in my opinion. But then also with all the others, you're getting pull quotes that you can use in your Kickstarter campaign as well. Some longer, some shorter, but that allows it to hit certain gamers who might align with certain reviewers. Another big one though is you need to navigate, once this all happens, you need to navigate all the green-eyed temptations out there. Once your Kickstarter launches, you're going to start getting emails from people saying, oh, have you thought about advertising with us? Or have you thought about this? Have you thought about these giveaways? Giveaways can be good, but you just need to be sure that that giveaway is one that's going to return, give a good ROI on you. People will offer to advertise and market for it. Probably one of the biggest ones is multi-language licensing. People will reach out and say, hey, I could get your game in translated in Chinese or French or German. There's nothing wrong with that. I ended up doing that. I ended up having it done in 10 different languages. So Distilled is in 10 different languages around the world. That allowed me to print more games, but there's also a price kind of that comes with that, which I'll get to in a second. And obviously lots of manufacturing companies are out there too. So basically what I'm saying is before you say yes to any of this stuff, you want to really think hard about whether that's something more you want to take on. That brings me to a fourth lesson learned. Think very hard about language licensing specifically. So I saw all these extra copies I'm going to get to print. And yeah, I get a little bit of extra money as well. What I didn't really realize, at least the way I went about it and how I found this is probably taken up more time since the Kickstarter than everything else combined. I have to interact with 10 different licensing companies. I have to send them files. I have to proof files. It has been a royal pain. And if I could do it over again, I probably would have chosen maybe one language, German, to do. Because otherwise, you're just not seeing printing enough. Does it mean that eventually I wouldn't do it? No, but at the time, I just can't handle that. So again, I know that most of you are like, oh, this is not something I'm really concerned about right now, Dave. But what I'm trying to say is just really think hard when these opportunities of like, oh, I could reduce the cost per unit of my game and I could get it to further out there. Make sure you understand what comes with that as well. All right, so I know I'm kind of just a few over, so here we go. Classy tips is a review. It's all in one slide. Achieve the testing trifecta, but don't forget the meat space. No wrong answer, publish or pitch, but be sure to say you're saying goodbye to family and free time if you are self-publishing. Leverage that network or create one, but also always strive to diversify your team. And plan a Kickstarter like a wedding, but beware of language licensing. So again, these are mine. Obviously, some of these are a little bit more personal to me. Each person's going to have their own story. But as you can see, what we started out with this really ended up filling up with lots more stuff. Different companies I had to work with, different cons I needed to attend to, different roles. You can see I stopped being a game designer for a bit and now became a full-time publisher. Things change, things evolve. You just need to know kind of what you're getting into. So like I had said earlier, I'm really excited though to start on this journey again. I enjoyed it enough, I loved it, every aspect of it, the game design, the publishing side, that I'm continuing to move forward with this, with a new game, like I said, Luthier, that I'll be playtesting here. I'd love to have you all playtest, but also, like I said before, I'd love to playtest your games, because that's what this is all about. So with that, since I'm over time, I'm going to end there, but if you have any questions, and I'm serious, I'd love to chat with you this con. If you want to sit aside and have a drink, I like whiskey. You can go to my website, you can email me, whatever you want. I really believe strongly in us supporting each other and lifting each other up. So whatever I can do to help you on your journey, and maybe find yourself like this, or as published with a designer or with a publishing company, that would be great. So thanks a lot, everybody. Appreciate it.